what is wrong with going to a spring election when not only would we have more time, but additionally we have 2 city council positions coming up, and we can make that an issue and let the candidates talk about it. Is there a movement to make it an April spring election?
Well, I think you make a great point. Don't forget, there is it 2 city council members and the mayor that will be up for re-election, or I'm not for re-election, but those seats are open. So that's really valid. We're going to have lots of new faces potentially, or depending on who wins what election. It's certainly a valid concept that we would wait. I don't know if it's spring election. I don't know if it's 3 years from now, but it's definitely not now.
I thought Joseph brought a very good perspective on that graph that they had about, where does it look like we're paying? I mean, you can hide what you're paying for. If it's important, if water's important, why would we want to hide what we're paying for, whether it's infrastructure or usage? You're not going to conserve it. You're not going to know what you're paying for if you don't have that connected with the water usage. So why wouldn't we want to put that into the rates and have them change how they do the rates? Portion for infrastructure, portion for usage, so we see the full cost.
I'll take that one. There is a good argument to have it be in user fees, just so there's a good accountability to be realized. And I will point out that of the options that the city of Wichita is looking at right now, ASR is the only one that really is a investment in infrastructure. The El Dorado option is paying for development of El Dorado infrastructure, and also a significant amount of the dollars, of the $250 million, is prepaying for water up through 2025, 2029, depending upon the El Dorado scenario.
I think, Cindy brought up a good point about changing from one type of grass to another type of grass that doesn't require enough water or as much water. That sort of thing happens naturally when you're like, okay, I'd love to have a green lawn, but right now my lawn is costing X number of dollars. I'm going to kill it and reseed it or whatever it might be. You start to see people make decisions. How important is it to an individual to use as much water now as they did before? And then you find the people who don't. And if you let the price of the consumer float or go up, as we expect it will go up, then you won't have the same conservation economic problems that the city worries about. Because if you do see conservation efforts, they're voluntary efforts, and those who still do want to pay a lot of money do, and the rates are allowed to float with that, so you don't have this huge sudden shortfall when you say you can only water your lawn twice a week or something like that.
And this may go back to the timing issue, but it's related. Something else that came out of today's workshop was that the El Dorado plans, or the treated water or raw water, at this point, 2 weeks out before the city council makes a decision of which way they want to go, the city of El Dorado hasn't guaranteed that water would be available in a 1% drought scenario. So if the whole purpose is to prepare for a 1% drought, that's not a guaranteed option.
So you're saying we're definitely ready to spend $250 million on this? Just kidding.
Well, I asked that question about El Dorado providing us the water. I mean, think about it. We're in this horrid drought scenario. The water's not available for El Dorado to give to us, and I was assured that the language of the contract would assure we'd get our water. What does a contract mean when there's no water? I'm still perplexed by that. I understand what he meant, but a contract doesn't guarantee water.
One thing I want to add in relation to the 1% drought planning that I think maybe I skipped in my opening comments is that if we as a community plan for a 2% drought, we have adequate water supply through 2060 without doing anything else.
So Carmen, that's a question I have. I'm over here to your left. Why is the city pursuing a 1% instead of 2%? And then a question for the whole group, why do you think the city seems to be obviously rushing this a little bit? I mean, they don't have a real concrete plan for any of the areas.
I think that the city is still responding to to their discomfort that they were in a little over a year ago. And it really wasn't an uncomfortable place for city employees, city water employees, elected officials to be in at that point in time. And really with the history of the city's water expertise and employees, it was just kind of coincidentally they were at a point where they didn't have the right people in place in a drought situation. They have some talent at the city now, but I think what they're doing is they're reacting to all the public outcry that they heard a little over a year ago. And of course, they heard it loud and clear, and they heard probably from the people that wanted to water their lawns because their house was for sale. And they were going to charge us an extra $1,000 because we overwatered our lawn. And those were the people they were hearing about. And then they've got this fear about what are we going to do if we're in true climate change and this 1% drought is our way of life moving forward. You have a tree ring study on your table that shows that historically over the last 800 to 1,000 years there have been 50-year droughts. So there's a lot of response to that kind of information. As to why they're rushing it, maybe I'll let some of the other people comment on that.
I don't know that anybody up here can actually answer that question, but there's an easy number to call City Hall, and they can put you in touch with your city council member.
That's what I was going to say. That's right. Yeah, I don't know that we know why they're rushing it. However, have you ever been part of a team where this thing is rolling forward and you've suddenly got the whole big group involved, and maybe there's been press involved, and what do? It can be uncomfortable to back away from things that you've spent a lot of money and time in. Call your city councilman or city councilwoman and let them off the hook and tell them that you're ready for them to step back and take pause.
I would only add that that's sort of par for the course, is that once proposals are put out there, there's always a rush to get them passed. It doesn't always feel hurried, but there's always a strong, I guess, a lack of desire to question whether or not something's necessary or even a good idea. And this appears to be how the council usually operates. Fewer questions than fewer questions that I would ask if I were on the council.
I'd like to make a quick statement. I think that the answer to that question is that they're looking for a sales tax. They're just going to find out what we want to spend it on. That's why they're rushing, because they want the sales tax no matter what. About the water issue, Dr. Hall brought up an issue of monetizing water and bringing buying up the Equisbed's rights that are held by other people. And also, the idea I talked to him afterwards, what about our water rights? If we have water rights, that we could sell. If I conserve more and somebody needs to use more, I could sell a certain amount of my water if I was given an allotment. Those issues are not being explored because we're being bulldozed over the top because we want to get the sales tax.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know that there was a specific question in there, but I want to respond to something that you said. What I would have liked to have seen were people from the city listening to what Art Hall had to say. What a tremendous opportunity to have him here.
And they were all gone.
They left, and many of them never came in the first place. I would have loved to have heard or seen some more folks from the city in the audience to have gotten that perspective. He had great perspective.
Whatever this vote's going to be, I think they should be separated as a separate chunk for each of the items they want. When it comes to economic development, leave money in people's pockets to spend as they will, and let the free market determine that. When it comes to transportation, I'm a libertarian. I support private business. I don't like to see government get in areas where private business should do it.
There was talk at different times that maybe these pieces would be separated out. I don't have the answer to that. I don't know if they're still talking about pulling some of those pieces apart or not. There's always scuttlebutt about different things like that. I'm with you on the free market. I'd love to see some options with transportation come to town. I know many of you have probably traveled and maybe used Uber or something like that, but the regulations are so tight here in Wichita. Anything like that's prevented. And call your city councilman.
Ready? One issue I heard them talk about this morning before I got here was what about including the county in this? You know, on this sales tax. And to the geologist lady, I understand they're still drilling wells, water wells west of Wichita. Is that correct?
Yes, they are drilling wells west of Wichita. Just in case anybody's wondering, you know, after overwatering our lawn out east, we sold that house. We moved west, actually in the Mays area, and having been born and raised on the east side, I was amazed that everybody over on the west side has, you know, a shallow aquifer watering well for watering their grass. There's good and bad with that. That's an aquifer that's not being used as a potable water supply, and it is lowering the demand on the city water. So yeah, there's a lot of water out west that isn't available out east, but it's not the same water that gets sent to the treatment plant.
Sure. The county issue, Councilmember Meitzner brought up the question to staff of what cities around Wichita are supported by the Wichita water system. And those include Bel Air, Valley Center, Rose Hill, Park City, Derby, Keachai, Andover, and Bentley. And I think there was another one that I missed somewhere in there. But the question I think he was raising was, you know, if the city of Wichita imposes a sales tax for our water supply, and we're supplying water to these other jurisdictions, where is the fairness in that? That may or may not be what he was getting at. That's what I took from it.
Well,
They do.
we pay 1.6 out of it.
They ought to raise them.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I am just curious. The one thing I'm not hearing anybody talk about is the depth of the engineering that has taken place to make these pronouncements about the water supply. Has anybody ever considered recharge from the floods of the Arkansas River when it washes a lot of water downhill? What's going on as far as the engineering aspect of this thing? And I'm not hearing any time frame. I've heard it from 20 years to 30 years and even 40 years. Something like this needs to be a long-term project with aims and goals that are defined, not just a political, gee whiz, we need to do this because we're running short of money. Thank you.
I can't say that I have an answer for engineering studies done on the Ark River, but I will say that the Ark River is tied to the aquifer, and if you recall back in 2012, there was no water in the Arkansas River, and the aquifer will feed the stream until the aquifer gets so low that you won't see any water in the river, and the water level below the surface keeps going lower and lower and lower. I don't think that that really is a viable option on a long-term basis unless you're looking at something south of town. And the city has looked at that and done some preliminary investigations on what's called indirect potable reuse. And maybe you've been hearing about Wichita Falls, Texas, and they are taking their discharge water from their wastewater treatment plant and piping it right back to their treatment plant, treating it again and putting it out in the pipes. That's because they are out of water. The city of Wichita has looked at indirect, where they would put wells downstream from the discharge point of the wastewater treatment system and pump water out of the aquifer, because we dump something like 30,000 million gallons, something like that, into the river. It's really our water. So we could get it out of the stream bed and bring it back here and treat it and put it back in our pipes. That option is is a high dollar option. So there has been some engineering, some preliminary looks at that, but one more thing about the engineering piece. I think it's a valid comment that more engineering studies needs to be done of the Equus If we're looking at doubling down on the ASR project, the Equus beds as an aquifer needs to be modeled, particularly in a 1% drought scenario. And that's an engineering study that I'm not sure is going to be adequately done in the short term.
I don't have anything else to add.
Do we know if the city council decides to go ahead and say, let's have an election, do we know what the ballot language is going to look like? Can it be something as simple as, shall the city raise the sales tax by 1 cent per dollar? Or does the ballot language have to be specific as to how the money will be spent?
The ballot language has to be specific. Now, how specific it has to be is up for discussion. So it will be very interesting to see how they play that out. It has to specify what it's going towards. Now, the flip side of that is if a municipality or county puts in the sales tax for a specific purpose, and the revenues exceed that expense, or that expense is not as high as was projected. Say the fire engine is only $80,000 instead of $100,000. The remaining revenue just goes back into the general fund.
Anybody else? Questions?
Well, I really appreciate what everybody's done and the time they've taken to bring us up to date. One of you mentioned something about Wichita doesn't have a sales tax. Was it you?
City sales tax, yes.
Well, we
yes,
do.
yes.
And, you know, the reason for that sales tax back in 84 or 85 was half of it was pledged to go to the reduction of property taxes, and half of it was supposed to go to Kellogg. Yes. And I don't know that they've done anything on Kellogg the last 10 years or so, maybe acquiring some property. Right. But it really is outrageous that we take, let's see, 30 years to do this. Absolutely. I mean, we're going to have to start replacing, you know, the first part of it. But in terms of the water supply, I really respect those that say it's complicated, because it is. But it isn't as though they haven't had some work to draw on from previous councils. When I left in 2003, we were assured we had a 50-year water supply. And that's where the recharge was initiated. And I just don't understand where all the money has gone that they've spent. And I know that engineering and these types of things are very expensive. But, you know, we've had a community ostensibly for the last 10 years that's been visioneering, whatever that means. And, you know, through the course of that, someone should have said, what do you think about a city without water? Do you like that? But I don't know what they did on that. But not all of a sudden, but it emerges now that there really hasn't been sufficient planning. And I don't know why. Part of it, I think, is you've had an enormous transition in city government. You had an 18-year city manager that died. And you had a significant change on the Wichita City Council. And I think you had people that had a far different perspective on what it takes to be a city that's a good place to work and to invest and to play. Sure. But I think you're right. If I'm assessing this, I don't think they're anywhere close to having clarity on the sales tax. And I don't really care what Lawrence or Schenectady, New York, or others charge in sales taxes. You can always find higher sales taxes. But it has to be in line with the rhythm of the community. And this is just all fuzzy to me.
I'm going to clarify one thing. Who don't know, this is former Mayor Bob Knight. Yes, that's right. The city does receive a percentage of the county tax, correct? That 1%.
Well, it was a one-time only city tax, and the county joined.
Yes, just to clarify. Good.
I think he brings up a good point. Not only when you left office, Bob, was the feeling that there was a 50-year water supply, but much more recently than that, there have been studies that showed that Wichita, or claimed that Wichita was a model for other municipalities because of what a reliable water supply. Bob, you had that report up on your website. I mean, that's 2 years ago, 1 year ago? Year and a half ago. So it is complicated, and spending, the idea of that we spend another $250 million, because we've already spent roughly $250 million on this specific issue, and it has not yielded the reliable water supply that everybody sort of thought when all the money was being spent. Speaks to the fact that we need to examine and feel, I think, more sure this time than we did last time we spent $250 million. Maybe I shouldn't do this. I do want to address some comments earlier about why the rush, and I think everybody's a little suspicious that the city council has done a lot of outreach and has asked a lot of people, what's the most important thing to you? Water has come up, and that the city council tied a whole bunch of things that they personally want and their circles of friends want. Now, I think we're all hesitant to say that up here because we're like, well, I didn't hear that from anybody on the city council. They're like, yeah, we're just trying to disguise our economic incentives under the guise of water and roads. Nobody's going to tell you that. I am suspicious of that, and my only comment on it, other than suspicion that I cannot confirm, is that the only real way to make sure that they're not doing that is to separate those bills.
Right.
If no one else, I wanted to take the opportunity and thank former Mayor Knight for kind of bringing up a little bit of the history, because at the moment, the county collects the 1% sales tax, but we spend 27 cents out of every dollar that comes in. The city of Wichita spends more than twice as much, and as former Mayor Knight points out, half of it was supposed to be used for making Kellogg Freeway, and the other half was supposed to be used for property tax relief. And let me publicly state, having the figures I've seen for the mid to late 1980s, it looks like the city did a much better job of lowering the mill levy at that time than the county did, from the data I've seen. But state law that was passed to allow that 1% sales tax to take place basically gave all of the incorporated municipalities a cut of the funds. And so it's a very complicated formula, but I think it's pretty obvious to everyone here that if you give cities like Derby or Valley Center or Bel Air a portion of the countywide sales tax, I really don't think that they're going to see Kellogg as the #1 road priority in their community. And if anyone has a different view on that from the panel, I'll kind of throw that out there as a question, because the challenge we have at the county with that current mill levy, for instance, is it's based on a formula of population times the property tax mill levy. So the higher the property tax mill levy it is, the more money you get. And I find that to be a perverse incentive in state law. And if you have any comments on this, I'm going to kind of leave it in terms of, if you have any questions in terms of how we distribute that formula or how that ought to be changed under state law for the current sales tax, I'd be interested in those comments.
Carl, you're always trying to hijack my presentations. I tell you what. Just kidding. Carl is a frequent caller into the radio show and adds a lot to the discussion in the way he just did.
I'll leave him. Okay. One of the things I've observed here, and I came in a little late, but nobody seems to be talking about conservation. Maybe you have, and I haven't heard it. You know, water resources are finite. I grew up in western Kansas. You know, I used to hear my dad say, "Oh, there's thinking around here that we just got an infinite amount of water under us. It's a big river. It's just flowing through underneath us. We just tap it forever." It's a great big myth. We all know that the water table is going down in western Kansas. They take it every year. Irrigation out there, they take a test of it every year. You know, I don't know the details of that, but so I want to know what we're going to do for conservation. I had an engineer in from the water department. I've been urging John Todd to bring a real engineer in here. He came over to the Wichita Pachyderm Club that we tried to get going, and he said if we get into a drought situation, we're in real trouble in Wichita. And we saw that here just in the last several years. And we're tracking water. That's what we're doing when it rains. So I'm asking, you know, what are we going to do about finite resources, finite water resources, conservation, and that sort of thing. Person from West Wichita talking about West Wichita. That water will run out someday. Okay, thanks.
The city has addressed that to some degree, and it's really curious the approach they've taken. They've developed a conservation plan, but one of the concerns that the city staff has expressed was if we don't sell enough water, if not enough water is used, then city revenues drop. So it's very difficult to understand the process by which we are considering spending $250 million on a new water supply, when if we conserved and set up a workable conservation plan, that we may not have to do that. Yet, if we do that, then we won't have revenues. I mean, it's just makes me think of a dog chasing its tail.
That was my same comment.
I would just say that all resources are finite, right? Natural resources are finite resources, and you can ask, we can look at other, are we out of time, John? I see you making hand signals. All resources are finite, and so if you want to find a way, or many of the ways which we deal with finite resources in other areas, you look at how we deal with oil, look at how we deal with nutrient-rich soil and so forth. There are how you deal with trees, how you deal with lots of things. There's renewal efforts, as much as there are many oil wells, for example, both in the Middle East, and in the United States, that were not profitable to mine 30 years ago, or 20 years ago in the 1990s, when oil was selling for $10, $20 a barrel. Suddenly, they become very profitable when you're selling oil for $120 a barrel. And so, inasmuch as you can allow prices to determine decision making, you deal with conservation of finite resources usually in a much more efficient way than bureaucratic decisions about the same subject.
You know, in my initial comments, I did talk about conservation. And with the Water Task Force, we recommended that the city plan for a 2% drought. That was our number one recommendation. Our number two recommendation was that they get serious about conservation, including the drought-tolerant landscaping, and including, you know, intense education efforts of the public. But also tied with that comes a change in how they establish the rate structure. And they have to have a rate structure that will cover their costs to provide the service. And right now, that rate structure, although it is tiered, and the high water users will pay more for the more water that they use, you know, the city does not, from its base rates, get enough revenue to cover its costs. So those were key things that came out of the Water Task Force that would allow the city to use the 2% drought planning moving forward. They have to get serious about conservation.
Is there some sort of citizens coalition that's in the process of being developed? Would be maybe a reasonable approach to actually solving some of these important problems and how to pay for it?
Funny you would ask.
That sounds like a planted question.
Hey,
Come on.
read straight from my script. No, that's not true. That's not true. Actually, indeed, there is. Tomorrow at 1:30 at Handy Mailing, 3839 West Dora, south of Kellogg and West Street. We being a group of business owners, concerned citizens, community leaders, a variety of people who just have been concerned about the sales tax for some time, have grouped together, and we are going to launch a coalition in opposition to the sales tax. Again, hopefully the city council won't move forward with this. Hopefully we won't have to move forward. Contact them and ask them for that. But if indeed the plan does move forward, the coalition will be ready to oppose the tax.
All right. I want to thank our guests for coming and making these presentations.